Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm your host, Phil Klein, and I'm here with the travel writer, Rick Steves. Rick, thank you again for being here.
You're welcome, Phil. Thanks for having me.
So good to see you. Um, I wanted to turn to the question of being a tour guide. You have probably taught more people to be tour guides than just about anyone. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think it takes to be a really good tour guide or host?
I think a tour guide needs to have a passion for what they're teaching. I hope a tour guide considers him or herself a teacher, kind of a mentor for a broader perspective. I've been to tour guide schools where they're looking for jobs, and I've been the employer, and we have like speed dating, and I sit there and each of them come and try to sell themselves on me. And I've talked to 50 people that are trying to be tour guides. I go home thinking I wouldn't hire any of these people. They're looking for a job, and they're looking for to do all the front door kind of tourism kind of stuff. I want just somebody who's just a natural enthusiast, evangelical about their culture. I mean, that's the passion that powers a good tour guide. And then you can talk about all the skills necessary to do that. But fundamentally, it's somebody who's a teacher and who's passionate about the culture they're trying to share.
Rick, tell me, what do you think it takes to make a really good tour guide?
Well, simply put, Phil, it's just a passion for teaching about the culture that you love. That's it. You can learn the other stuff. But if you're passionate about teaching a culture you love, you've got the foundation for being a tour guide that I would love to have leading one of my tours.
So what would you say to someone who, or what would be a good challenge for someone who wants to find a way to take that passion and to tell local stories or local cultures, perhaps if they haven't ever done that before?
I don't know what works conventionally, but what worked for me was just very organic. I traveled as a student, and I spent my lunches in the dormitory at the University of Washington cafeteria helping people plan their trips. I would take my friends to Europe, and they were kind of lazy about what are we going to do for a reservation tomorrow, and I was always thinking of the logistics of the travel. I was aware of the potential for a great time, but also the need for being practical and lining things up. And then I started taking small groups around Europe in just minibuses for my work. And I was the driver and the guide. And then I started teaching other guides to teach what I was teaching. And through my own experience, I gained a sixth sense of how do people learn? How much can people absorb? How many Madonnas and children can a mortal tourist see before they wouldn't cross the street for a Raphael? These are important issues. So you finesse it. And after each trip, I would do the best of Europe in 20 days, and I'd sit in my hotel room in Paris at the end of it. I'd read the feedback and I'd think, how can I do it better? And then I'd meet the next group and I would do this 3,000 mile, 20-day loop again. And I practiced. What is my strategy? Am I going to be everybody's friend, or am I going to be their stern teacher and the organizer? Am I going to be a cheerleader and a comedian, or am I going to be a professor? What are my weaknesses? Do I really want to hire a local guide, or is it better for me to do the walk through this town so I understand the context of my group? It's an endlessly fun challenge to be a good guide.
And what do you think actually are some of the bones or the elements or the rack of an excellent tour?
Well, an excellent tour uses your time smartly and maximizes the experience. You pay more for a tour, but when all the dust settles, as if you measured experiences, I think a tour is a better value because you're having less anxiety, less stress, you're using your time smarter, and you're having more experiences per day. One of my things that I keep harping on with my guides, and I've got 100 guides that I employ. We took 30,000 people around Europe last year on our tour, in a couple of years ago on our tours, and we had 1,200 different tours. And we have an annual meeting here in Seattle where I fly the guides in, and it's a week-long intense seminar. One of the things I keep harping on is identify anxiety and then overcome it. What are people anxious about? They're anxious about, do they have change for the lady at the toilet at the truck stop? Understand, anticipate. People are anxious about, there's a freeloader on our tour. Should we be concerned? As the tour guide, I will say, hey, we've got a visitor who's freeloading on our tour. you're welcome to stay, but stand in the back and don't ask a lot of questions, and then everybody relaxes. You have a sense of how are people doing. You work to divide them up so that they bond as a group, and there's fun ways to do that. A tour guide needs to have that leadership, something that I call group think. It sounds almost like scary or autocratic or something like that, but I love group think. It's just, okay, there's different drinks at the restaurant. I'm just going to take orders right now for the basic beer. If you want the good local beer, it's €3 and 20, it's €3 and 75 cents. I'll say it's just €4, and somebody will come around and get your order later, but who wants a beer? And 3/4 of the group just go beer. Great. 3/4 of the group gets their beer. They got their drink right away. And then the oddballs get their special drink later on. So it's that group think efficiency. You got the efficiency. And then when you've covered the efficiency groundwork, then you got to teach in a way that's fun. And that's a whole different thing. You got to understand the culture. Of my guides, I wonder if somebody wanted to get a job working for Rick Steves in my tour program, what would be your best way to present yourself? For me, I don't want somebody who's just an expert in that European country that we travel in, nor do I want somebody who's just a great American personality who relates wonderfully with people and can teach. I need somebody with a foot in both cultures. So I find Americans that have married into Europe, or Europeans that have lived and studied in America. They have an honest, intimate understanding of who are Americans, and they know what their culture is all about. Those kind of guides have a big advantage over other guides. And of course, the language skills are critical.
You mentioned a little while ago the importance of feedback and seeking and processing that and translating that into improved behavior. What are some ways that a tour guide can seek feedback and the feedback especially that would help them to become a much better guide or host?
Yeah, this is just sort of the weeds of being a good tour guide, but you need feedback. People need to be comfortable explaining what is their need. Halfway through every tour on a Rick Steves tour, we have a midterm review. And the guide just says, I'm just going to collect an anonymous scrap of paper and you can tell me the music's too loud on the bus, or you don't have enough rest stops, or you walk too fast, or the bus driver has body odor. Let me know. I can straighten that out. It's okay. We're in this together. You've paid good money. We want you to have a good trip. Help me give you the greatest trip. At the end of the trip, we have the serious feedback. And this goes back way to my minibus days, the minibus days when there was one Rick Steves guide and it was me. And I would drive 8 people around on a minibus. And at the end of the tour, they would give me an envelope with their anonymous letters in it that gave their feedback. And I told them, you guys are guinea pigs for all future travelers. And you are the recipient, you're the beneficiary of all the guinea pigs that came before you. And my trajectory as a tour guide is like this, and you're helping out. So give me your candid feedback. And it was a very emotional thing for me, Phil, because I worked so hard as a kid in my 20s driving these buses and starting out my tour program. And it was a ritual. I would finish with the group in Paris. I always went to the Sacre-Cœur Church, and I just went there and I just was thankful. There's this beautiful Neo-Byzantine church on the Montmartre overlooking Paris. And then I was very tired. I was very thankful, and I was trying to be very thoughtful. And then I'd go back to the hotel, and it was a ritual. I'd open the envelope, and I would read each of these letters from my groups, who I had been their servant, their teacher, the guy who poured their juice. And I would read the feedback, and then I would learn, and I would meet the next group a couple of days later, and I would do it again. But the feedback is your friend. In fact, I say that to my guides when we have our annual gathering. Feedback's your friend. You're great, but you can be better, and what you want is candid feedback. My worst feedback was from my grandma. She just said, "Oh, Rick, you're so good." I don't want to hear that. I know I'm good. I want to know, how can I be better? And that's feedback.
That's really great. What would it be like, do you think, to live in a world where everyone had well-developed abilities to be a good host and a good tour guide? How do you think people might treat one another in that kind of an environment?
It's got to go two ways. You can be a good tour guide, but you got to have people that are eager to receive, who are eager to learn, who want to be changed, who want to grow. I'm really lucky with the way we promote our tours on a Rick Steves tour, because we get people that want to get out of their comfort zone. We get people who see culture shock as the growing pains of a broadening perspective. Now, if my neighbors in my community, we could see life in my community as a tour also. If we wanted to learn from each other, if we wanted to have this, I think, Rousseau nature of the social contract, where we all give up a little bit more than you might think is necessary in order to live peaceably together, rather than that don't tread on me Locke social contract, which is just get out of my way. I can do anything I want as long as I don't hurt anybody else. That sort of socialism, communityism, then you could have a chance where we could all learn from each other, and we could be thirsty for inspiration from other people. That would be pretty utopian. I hadn't thought about that. But what I love about my role as a tour guide is I've got people who knowingly get on that bus knowing they're going to be changed, and they're thirsty for change. And they want me to help keep them safe and curate all this information. But they want to be different when they get out of this tour. And that's why they dedicate the time and the money to take the tour.
So how do you believe tours actually do change people? Are there specific kinds of ways that you see that?
I have to be really careful, because I'm thankful for how travel has changed me. And I just want to hit people on the head with this, but you can't do that. That's non-productive. What you'd have to do as a more thoughtful guide is respect that everybody has a different life story and it's legit. And then thoughtfully, gently put them in a cultural situation that's going to challenge them, open them up to it, and let them draw their own conclusions. It's a beautiful thing. And I've seen it. I've seen people who are very sort of set in their ways. I won't say liberal or conservative. I'll just say set in their ways. And then I've watched them over the course of a 2 or 3 week tour struggling with this reality that Europeans do things differently than we do in America, and they're thankful for it. We don't need to say that's right and we're wrong, but it's the first step in a broader perspective is to realize good people, thoughtful people deal with the same challenges in different cultures differently. And it's cool to compare notes. I'm really into drug policy reform, not because I'm pro-drugs. I just think our drug laws are very painful and non-productive in our society. And Europe has the same appetite for drugs and the same problem with opioid abuse and addiction and the same enthrallment with marijuana and alcohol. How do they do it? How do they do it in a safe way? In Scandinavia, in June, you see flatbed trucks all decorated up with kids painted and wearing costumes, just drunk as can be, going from house to house on graduation, and their parents are pouring the beer. Their parents hired the flatbed truck and the driver because the parents know the kids are going to drink anyways. Let's organize it in a way where the kids aren't going to drink and drive. Now that's called pragmatic harm reduction. That's good parenting. That's European. That is so European to me. It's going to happen anyways. Let's not just say no. Let's just find a way to let it happen where nobody gets hurt. We've all been there. We've all been kids wanting to do that. We've all been parents wishing our kids weren't going to do that. Scandinavians, they host the keggers as parents. And I think that'd be a tough sell in America, but it sure works for Scandinavia. And I celebrate that. I love being in Scandinavia in graduation time because it's a joyful occasion, and the kids are all breaking into adulthood in a fun way.
You talk about learning from other cultures. Is a way in which that learning is also a political act? That would be another kind of way to get at that.
Right. I find it so entertaining that people complain that I'm making travel a political act. To me, thoughtful travel gives you empathy for the other 96% of humanity. It lets you see your country in the context of the rest of the world. It lets you be appreciative of how privileged you might be, of how there are consequences on how we live our lives that ripple all through our community. They ripple into the future, and they ripple south of the border. When I say south of the border, I mean, into the developing world. And when we travel, we bring home the most beautiful souvenir, and that's this empathy for the other 96% of humanity. And then when we live our lives here as citizens of this most powerful nation on the planet, just mindful of that, we're making travel a political act. A lot of people say, oh, there's hungry people, and you're spending so much money, go down there to see this poverty in Central America. If you really cared, you would just give it to some food aid, and then they would be able to live better. Well, you can make that point. But when I travel, I knowingly spend 5 times the annual income of the people I'm taking photographs of just to go visit with them. It's okay, because I'm going down there, I'm learning, and I'm coming home with a better understanding of them, with an empathy for their struggles. And when I take that empathy into the voting booth, it seems perverse, but I don't vote for what's good for me. I vote for what's right, what's ethical, what's good for the world, what's good for people who are less privileged than me, what's good for the future, what's good for our children, what's good for people with no voice. And if you really were selfish, if you've traveled, you know that even if you're motivated only by greed, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's a miserable place to raise your kids. You want to work for that kind of justice. That's travel as a political act. And if that's something you're afraid of, that's a shame, because I think that's the most beautiful thing about travel. It makes me a better citizen of the world.
So what if every teacher, parent, explorer had some of the skills or orientation or mindset that you and your tour guides have? Curiosity, willingness to follow through with acts of empathic exploration and discovery.
When I cross a border and they say, what's your occupation? I say teacher, because that's, I feel, what I am. I love teaching, and I've got the greatest classroom, and that's the road. The road. And my classroom is taking people out there, and it's experiential. I suppose that's fundamental to good teaching, is tangible. It's right here. It's real. It's getting out of my norm. I believe so strongly that you can learn more about yourself by leaving home and looking at your world from a distance. I think you can extrapolate the challenges we're facing as a nation if you go to other nations that are further along that road and see the consequences of their mismanagement and their bad governance and their corruption and their greed or whatever. You can see things in high contrast that way. And then you go home and you realize history is speaking to us. The lessons that people have learned from another country are speaking to us. These are vivid ways of learning. One thing I talk with my guides about when it comes to teaching is, don't just stand in front of something and talk about something that doesn't relate to anything. It needs to have a tangible rack to hang on. So, you're standing there with a Roman column embedded in this wall. You can talk about how, on every church, you're sitting on the previous civilization's holy ground. Under the church would be a Roman temple, and under the Roman temple would be some prehistoric holy ground. And it's just logical that one society builds its holy place on the dirt of the previous society. These kind of ways of teaching, to me, are more vivid and more fun. So if we can do that, if we can make that learning vivid, and then with my tour guides, whenever you're teaching or telling a story, I don't tell a story just to entertain. Frankly, I'm not that wild about this whole passion that people have for storytelling. I always say, it's got to get a litmus test. So what? That's the litmus test. First of all, you need an agenda as a teacher. All over Europe in the 1800s, nations were coming together, and existing nations didn't want more nations together. And these nations were exercising their nationalism. Norway was distinct from Sweden. Bulgaria was not part of the Ottoman Empire. The German-speaking people should be one nation, not 20 little German-speaking nations. The Italians should be one nation. In 1850, there was no Germany, there was no Italy. In 1880, you got Germany and you got Italy. In the same generation, America was fighting the Civil War. Are we one nation or are we two nations? That's not a coincidence. Okay, there's something you want to teach. Nationalism, romanticism, late 1800s, all happening at the same time in different countries. You want to teach that. Let's teach it by telling stories. And then, yeah, they created Italy. And then the leaders of Italy, the Madisons and Jeffersons of Washington of Italy, who you'll see their names on the squares all over Italy, Mazzoni, Cavour, Garibaldi, and so on, Victor Emmanuel, they declared, now we've created Italy, now we got to create Italians. And Italians have this concept of campanilismo. It's the land of 1,000 bell towers. A bell tower is a campanile. And the Italians love the sound of their church's bell tower. That's great, but their loyalty is to their town or their region. And they had the challenge of creating Italy. So these are ways of teaching. And then you go home and you've learned something that I think matters. I don't want people to go home with goofy little stories. I want people to go home with a better appreciation for history that can then apply to us today. Because in so many ways, history is speaking to us right now. And if you happen to be a historian or appreciate history, you can hear it. And a lot of people are oblivious to that.
Wow. So making history and whatever is taught clear through having an agenda and making sure that it's relevant to the listeners and answers a so what. Those are really critical elements that when they are part of a tour or a teaching experience, they animate it with value for the listener. If with that all together, is there something that you'd like to kind of leave us with in hopes that we take a next step in our journey to become better guides of whatever tours it is that we live in our daily lives?
Phil, it's so vivid to me when I look at foreign study programs in Europe, our kids on a foreign study trip with a chaperone. And in a lot of cases, these are very committed chaperones and great teachers. And in some cases, they're just people that scammed a free trip, And what saddens me is sometimes they don't appreciate the opportunity for these students. They're all kids in their school age, They've got this beautiful chance to, maybe a once in a lifetime chance to open up to the rest of the world. And if they didn't have leadership on the part of their chaperones and teachers, it's just a silly high school party. But with inspirational teaching and leadership and guiding, it's a life-changing experience. So that's specifically for students, but I see us all as students. And for me as a tour guide, I've got that opportunity, that responsibility, that thrill, that honor of taking people and opening them up to what I think is so important, a broader perspective. So we can do that in our guiding in Europe. And I think we can be enthusiastic about that, the value of that kind of teaching in whatever niche we find ourselves as we embrace life with enthusiasm and celebrate the fact that we're not the norm, but that we live in a world that is a fascinating tapestry of cultures and eurekas and opportunities and challenges. And it just really carbonates our life. It puts more colors on the palette. It makes the weave more beautiful. There's so many ways that you can celebrate the value of learning. Travel is my way of learning. It's my way of tour guiding, but we can learn, we can celebrate life, and we can inspire people in many ways. And that's a joy.
Thank you so much, Rick. You really have given us another window into what it means to be on the school of the road as we travel in each our own way, but gain so much from what you've been sharing today and so many of your other moments of insight, wisdom, and wonderful teaching and tour guiding. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you, Phil. And it's been fun just to talk with you and explore the many ways that the road can be a kind of a school and a celebration at the same time.